The air in the motel room off Highway 2 hung thick and stale, a permanent scent of old cigarette smoke and cheap disinfectant that seemed to cling to the very fabric of the walls. Leo traced a restless finger along the peeling floral wallpaper. The pattern faded over years of sun and neglect to an indeterminate blush, a ghost of whatever vibrant bloom it once was. Outside, the low hum of an 18-wheeler rumbled past, a deep, resonant growl that vibrated through the flimsy windowpane, rattling the glass in its frame. It was well past midnight, the kind of hour when the world outside went quiet enough for the doubts to come screaming in, turning into gnawing beasts that clawed at the edges of a man's resolve. A single, bare bulb in the ceiling cast a harsh, yellow light, painting stark shadows across the threadbare carpet. Two twin beds stood against the far wall, their covers neatly folded, a testament to the motel's routine, but clearly undisturbed. Leo hadn't slept in days, not properly, not the kind of sleep that actually rested a man. He hadn't even bothered to unpack the worn duffel bag slung over the single, uncomfortable armchair by the door, its contents still a jumble of clothes and the few essentials he'd grabbed in a hurry. The bag sat there, a silent accusation, a physical manifestation of his refusal to settle, even for a night. On the chipped Formica bedside table, next to a rotary phone that seemed to mock him with its silence, a silence he both craved and dreaded, lay a crumpled photograph. It was a faded snapshot, taken last summer at the county fair. Sarah's smile was wide, genuine, a brilliant flash of white against her sun-kissed skin, her auburn hair catching the light like spun copper. And Lily, all of 6 years old, was perched precariously on her shoulders, eyes sparkling with pure, unadulterated joy, a sticky pink cloud of cotton candy clutched tight in her small hands. Leo picked it up, his thumb tracing the faint outline of Lily's cherubic face. He could almost hear her giggle, a bright, clear sound, so sharp and sweet that it cut through the desolate quiet of the room, a phantom melody in the stale air. This photo was both his anchor and the weight dragging him down. Every breath he took, every desperate decision he'd made, everything he was doing and everything he was about to do, was for them. It was for that smile, for that pure, unblemished joy in Lily's eyes. Yet, the thought of what he might lose in the process, the chasm of the unknown stretching out before him, made his stomach clench into a hard, cold knot. He ran a hand over his tired face, the stubble rough against his palm, and walked to the window, pulling back the thin, faded curtain. Beyond the cracked asphalt of the motel parking lot, where a couple of beat-up sedans and a rusty pickup truck sat like forgotten toys, the neon sign for Bud's Eats flickered erratically, a broken promise of sustenance in the gloom. It cast an intermittent, sickly red glow on the empty road, bathing the scene in a pulsing, uneasy light. Highway 2 stretched out into the oppressive darkness, an endless ribbon of blacktop that promised escape, promised a way forward, but delivered only more distance, more isolation. He watched a lone car's headlights cut through the night, a fleeting glimpse of movement, then gone. He pulled another cigarette from the crumpled pack in his shirt pocket, the worn cardboard soft between his fingers. The lighter clicked, a small spark blossoming into a flame, and the cherry glowed bright in the gloom, a tiny, defiant ember. He took a deep, shuddering drag. The smoke burned his lungs, a familiar, unwelcome comfort that scraped raw nerves but temporarily dulled the sharper edges of his fear. He watched the smoke curl and dissipate in the harsh yellow light, vanishing like his own fleeting hopes. He'd left Sarah and Lily 2 days ago, kissing Lily's forehead as she slept, leaving a note for Sarah on the kitchen counter. He'd told them he had a big job, an out-of-town repair that would bring in some much-needed cash, enough to finally get ahead. The lie tasted bitter, even now, a metallic tang on his tongue that no amount of smoke could erase. He remembered Sarah's tired smile, the way she'd squeezed his hand, her eyes full of unspoken worry but also a desperate hope that he would make things right. He couldn't look her in the eye for long, the guilt already a heavy burden in his chest. The truth was, Leo's auto repair was barely treading water. His old man, God rest his soul, had built that garage from the ground up, a honest living forged with grease and sweat, a legacy of hard work and integrity. Leo remembered the smell of oil and gasoline, the satisfying thunk of a wrench on metal, the steady stream of familiar faces bringing their sputtering Fords and rattling Chevys. But times had changed, subtly at first, then with an accelerating, unforgiving pace. New cars were harder to fix, their engines a labyrinth of wires and computers he barely understood, parts were more expensive than ever, and people were holding onto their money tighter, putting off repairs, driving their clunkers until they simply wouldn't go anymore. The steady hum of business had dwindled to a trickle, the phone rarely rang, and the dust on the old engine hoist grew thicker by the day. The bank had sent another letter last month, stern and unforgiving, the crisp white envelope a stark contrast to the smudged bills and advertisements that usually filled their mailbox. Foreclosure. The word, stark and brutal, had hung in the air of their small house like a death sentence, choking the life out of every conversation, every shared meal. Sarah had tried to be brave, suggesting she pick up extra shifts at the diner, her voice a little too bright, a little too quick. But Leo had seen the fear in her eyes, a flicker of panic she couldn't quite hide, and the worry lines etching deeper around her mouth, making her look older than her 32 years. He'd squeezed her hand then, too, a silent promise he wasn't sure he could keep. He couldn't let them lose everything. Not their home, the little bungalow with the crooked porch swing where Lily loved to read her picture books. Not their security, the fragile sense of stability they'd fought so hard to build. Not the life they'd carved out, brick by painstaking brick, through years of scraped knuckles and late nights. That's when Ray had called. Ray, an old acquaintance from high school, always on the fringes, always with an angle. Leo had seen him around town occasionally, usually in a shiny, new car, a Cadillac Eldorado one month, a Buick Riviera the next, cars that didn't quite fit Ray's usual profile, a little too flashy, a little too clean for a man who seemed to do nothing but drift. Leo had tried to shut out the insistent, gnawing voice of his conscience, the one that screamed at him every time Ray spoke. His gut churned, a cold, heavy stone settling deep inside him, but Ray just kept talking, his voice a low, persuasive hum, laying out the numbers with an almost surgical precision. It wasn't just a handout, it was a way out. The immediate relief shimmered before Leo's eyes like a mirage in the desert, a promise of keeping the garage, the very air he breathed, the home where Sarah and Lily slept soundly each night. Desperation, a cold, clammy hand, had settled on his shoulder, pressing him down, making him listen. He'd stared at the chipped Formica tabletop in the Greasy Spoon diner, the patterns blurring, trying to imagine a life where the weight of debt didn't crush his every waking moment. The diner itself was a monument to neglect, perched precariously on the outskirts of town, its neon sign half burnt out, buzzing like an angry hornet. The coffee tasted perpetually of burnt sugar and old socks, and the booths, cracked vinyl peeling at the seams, reeked of stale frying oil and forgotten dreams. Ray, in stark contrast, sat across from him, impeccably dressed in a tailored shirt, the top two buttons undone to reveal a glint of gold chain against his tanned skin. He looked like he belonged in a different world, a world where oil stains were a foreign concept, a world Leo only glimpsed on television. Leo, on the other hand, felt the familiar scratch of grease under his fingernails, the faint scent of engine oil clinging to his work jacket, a uniform of honest labor now tainted by this clandestine meeting. Ray had gestured, a casual flick of his wrist, and Leo turned to see Frank, a man whose presence filled the entire booth. Frank was a hulking mass of silent menace, his face set in a perpetual scowl, eyes like chips of granite that missed absolutely nothing. He didn't speak, just watched, and Leo felt a shiver trace its way down his spine, a primal warning. Ray, oblivious to the unspoken tension, continued his smooth pitch. The job, he explained, involved a specific kind of vehicle, a transport truck carrying something valuable, something that would solve all of Leo's problems. Leo's part was simple, a mechanic's job. Disable the alarm system, hotwire the rig, get it moving. His hands, accustomed to the intricate dance of wrenches and wires, were exactly what they needed. It's a one-time thing, Leo, Ray had assured him, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur, leaning slightly across the table. Clean job. In and out. No fuss. Enough money to clear every last one of those debts. Maybe even put a down payment on that new engine hoist you've been talking about for the garage. The words were a siren song, painting a vivid picture in Leo's mind. The shiny new hoist, the ease of lifting heavy blocks, the efficiency. More importantly, he saw Sarah's smile, free of the worry lines that had etched themselves around her eyes lately, saw Lily skipping without a care in the world. Everything she needed, everything she deserved. He tried to focus on that, on the vision of a life unburdened, a future secured. He reached across the table, his hand feeling rough and calloused against Ray's surprisingly soft, cool palm. The handshake was firm, a seal on the agreement, but the knot in his stomach tightened, a cold, hard lump of dread. The first step is always the hardest, he told himself, clinging to the old adage. It's just a few hours, a small transgression for a lifetime of security. But the lie felt heavier this time, a leaden weight settling deep into his bones, colder than the metal he worked with every day. The next few days blurred into a haze of nervous anticipation and a forced, brittle normalcy. Leo moved through his days at the garage like a man walking underwater, every action requiring immense effort. He'd wrench on engines, the familiar weight of the tools a small comfort, trying to keep his hands steady, his mind clear of the encroaching dread. But every clink of metal against metal, every high-pitched whine of a power tool, seemed to echo the impending job, a constant, unsettling reminder. He found himself dropping wrenches more often, his focus fractured. Once, he almost stripped a bolt on a customer's carburetor, catching himself just in time, his heart thumping in his chest like a trapped bird. The customer, a gruff old man named Mr. Henderson, had just grunted, "You all right there, Leo? Look like you seen a ghost." Leo had forced a laugh, a dry, rasping sound. "Just tired, Mr. Henderson. Long week." He'd made a few discreet calls from the payphone outside the liquor store, the plastic door squeaking as he pulled it open, the interior smelling faintly of stale beer and desperation. His breath plumed in the cool evening air as he fed quarters into the slot, the coins clinking with a hollow finality. Ray's voice on the other end was always calm, unhurried, yet it carried an undertone of steel. The instructions grew more detailed, more unsettling with each call. The truck wasn't just secured, it was a fortress on wheels, the cargo far more valuable than he'd imagined. "It's not just a simple hotwire, Leo," Ray had said, a new edge in his tone. "This rig's got a custom-built alarm system, military-grade almost. You'll need to dismantle it from the inside, bypass the whole network. We'll get you the schematics." The words had hit Leo like a punch to the gut. This wasn't small time anymore, not some joyride or petty theft. This was serious. He felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, the clean job turning murky, dangerous. He remembered a quiet evening with Sarah and Lily, an evening that now felt impossibly distant, bathed in a nostalgic, painful glow. They were sitting on the porch swing, the rhythmic creak a gentle lullaby, the air cooling after a sweltering summer day. The scent of honeysuckle was thick, almost cloying, in the twilight. Lily, her small legs dangling, was engrossed in a worn coloring book, her tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth as she hummed a tuneless melody, completely absorbed in her vibrant world. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, a familiar, comforting weight, her hand finding his, her fingers tracing the calluses on his palm. "You seem preoccupied, Leo," she'd murmured, her voice soft, laced with a gentle concern that pierced him. "Is everything all right with this big job you're working on?" He'd squeezed her hand, perhaps a little too tightly, forcing a smile that felt brittle on his face. "Just a lot of moving parts, honey. Nothing I can't handle." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth, a bitter betrayal. He wanted to tell her, to confess the fear that gnawed at him, the desperation that had driven him to this dirty deal. He wanted to lay bare the truth, to feel the relief of unburdening himself. But he couldn't. He saw the unwavering trust in her eyes when she looked up at him, the simple, profound faith she had in him, and he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he couldn't shatter that. The thought of her knowing, of her disappointment, her quiet heartbreak, was almost worse than the fear of getting caught, of facing jail. He felt like a ghost in his own life, moving through the motions, a silent observer to his own impending downfall, a terrible secret festering inside him, slowly poisoning everything. The night before the operation, the air thick with unspoken tension, Ray had called him to a secluded bar on the very edge of town. It was a place where shadows clung to every corner, where the dim lighting barely cut through the haze of cigarette smoke, and the sticky floors seemed to grip at his shoes with every step. Frank was already there, nursing a beer, his eyes constantly scanning the room, missing nothing, taking in every face, every movement. He barely acknowledged Leo, a silent, watchful presence. Ray, unfazed, laid out the final plan on a crumpled napkin, smoothing it out with a practiced hand. He drew crude maps, lines indicating routes, and scribbled timelines with a stubby pencil. "You go in here," he'd pointed, his finger tapping a specific spot on the napkin, "disable the system. Frank will handle the rest." The rest hung in the air, heavy and ominous, a chilling void of unspoken actions. Leo's role was critical, the key to unlocking the entire operation, but it was also painfully limited. He was to be the one to open the door, a mechanic, a tool in their hands, nothing more. But as Ray spoke, his voice calm and steady, a fragment of conversation drifted from a nearby booth, a hushed, almost conspiratorial exchange between Frank and another man Leo didn't recognize. The words were barely audible, just a whisper over the low hum of the bar, but they hit Leo like a physical blow, a sudden, brutal impact. "Dump the rig after the transfer. No witnesses." The phrase echoed in his mind, sharp and cold. No witnesses. It wasn't just about disabling an alarm anymore. It wasn't just about hot wiring a truck. It was about being part of something far more sinister, something that could lead to violence, maybe even murder. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was complicit. The choice, which had started as a desperate yes or no to a job, had twisted into something far more complex, far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. He was in too deep, tangled in a web spun by desperation and deceit, and he didn't know how to break free. Back in the anonymous motel room, the weight of that overheard conversation pressed down on him, suffocating. He paced, the worn floorboards groaning under his heavy, restless steps, each creak amplifying the frantic beat of his own heart. He picked up the rotary phone on the bedside table, its beige plastic cool and slick beneath his fingers. Sarah's number. His finger hovered over the dial, trembling slightly. He wanted to hear her voice, just for a moment, to ground himself, to somehow, impossibly, undo what he'd set in motion. He started to dial, the plastic disc whirring as he spun it, each number a step closer to confession, to release. Then he stopped abruptly, his hand slamming the receiver back into its cradle with a sharp, echoing click. What would he even say? "Honey, I'm about to commit a felony, and I might get killed, but it's for us." The words felt hollow, a cruel mockery of love. He couldn't. He wouldn't. The thought of leaving them, not just financially ruined, but truly, utterly alone, was unbearable, a pain sharper than any fear for his own life. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead, trickling down his temples. He was trapped between a rock and a hard place, between the very real, very dangerous threat of Ray and Frank, and the crushing, soul-destroying reality of his family's impending poverty. He tried to think of another way out, his mind racing, grasping at straws. Mike, his old friend, Mike, who ran a small engine repair shop a few towns over. Mike was honest, hardworking, always had a clear head. Maybe he could lend him some money, or at least offer some advice, a different perspective. Leo walked out into the chilly night, the motel's flickering neon sign, a garish orange against the dark sky, his only guide. He found the familiar payphone booth near Bud's Eats, fumbling for quarters in his pocket, his fingers clumsy with urgency. The plastic door creaked, a mournful sound, as he pulled it open, the interior smelling faintly of stale beer, dust, and the lingering scent of countless desperate conversations. He dialed Mike's number, the coins clinking as they dropped into the slot, each one a tiny hope. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times, each ring a hammer blow against his chest. Then, a new voice, mechanical and slightly distorted, broke the silence. An answering machine, a newfangled contraption Mike had just gotten, a small luxury that now felt like a cruel joke. "Hey, it's Mike. Leave a message after the beep." Leo listened to the mechanical tone, his heart sinking, the last vestiges of hope draining from him. He couldn't bring himself to leave a message. What would he say? "Mike, I'm in deep trouble. I need help. I need a way out of a criminal enterprise." No. He hung up, the click echoing in the silent booth, a sound of utter finality. He was truly alone. The choice was his, and his alone. He leaned his head against the cold, grimy metal of the payphone, staring out at the desolate highway, the red glow of Bud's sign reflecting in his tired, bloodshot eyes. The sun would be up in a few hours, and with it, the moment of truth. The clock radio on the bedside table, a cheap plastic thing with glowing green numbers, finally clicked over to AM. The air in the motel room was still and cold, heavy with the weight of unspoken decisions. Leo had spent the last hours staring at the stained ceiling tiles, the decision turning over and over in his mind like a broken gear, grinding against itself, refusing to mesh. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he couldn't go through with Ray's plan as it stood. The "no witnesses" comment had seared itself into his brain, a brandmark of horror. He was a mechanic, a man who fixed things, who built, who maintained. He was not a killer, not a party to something that could end in bloodshed, in someone else's life extinguished for a truckload of stolen goods. But he also couldn't just walk away. Ray and Frank wouldn't let him, that much was clear, and his family would still lose everything. His garage, his home, their future all gone. He had to find a third way, a path that was neither fully compliant nor outright defiant, a path that used his unique skills to protect, not destroy. He picked up his worn toolbox, the metal cool and familiar against his fingers, a silent promise of purpose in the terrifying hours ahead. The cool, metallic tang of the tools, a scent of oil and steel, filled the small space of the duffel bag as Leo's fingers brushed against the specialized picks he had honed over years, each one a testament to countless hours spent in quiet, illicit concentration. He pulled out the worn photograph, the edges softened from being touched so many times, and looked at Sarah's smile, then at Lily's bright, innocent eyes. A knot tightened in his stomach, a familiar mix of fear and fierce protectiveness. He wasn't going to let them down, not now, not ever. The thought was a silent vow, etched deep. He folded the photo carefully, pressing it into his shirt pocket, right over the frantic beat of his heart, a small, warm weight against his skin. He just had to be smarter than them, faster, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit luckier than he felt right then. He zipped up the duffel bag, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and slung it over his shoulder, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier than just tools and a change of clothes. The highway outside hummed, a low, expectant drone that seemed to pull him towards an inevitable future. The industrial park was a skeletal landscape of corrugated iron and broken windows, the air thick with the smell of exhaust fumes clinging to damp concrete. The gloom of the pre-dawn hour pressed in as he found Ray and Frank waiting. A battered Ford Econoline van, its side door ajar like a gaping maw, sat idling, a faint blue plume of exhaust curling into the cold air. Frank's face was a study in grim lines, his eyes narrowed, watching Leo approach with an almost predatory intensity. Ray, however, was a stark contrast, a cheap cigar clenched between his teeth, a wide, almost theatrical smile splitting his face. The glow of the cherry on his cigar pulsed with each breath. "Ready, Leo?" Ray's voice was too jovial for the hour, echoing unnaturally in the desolate space, a false cheer that grated on Leo's nerves. Leo simply nodded, his own face a mask of practiced calm, a blank canvas betraying none of the turmoil churning beneath. He climbed into the van, the interior smelling of stale cigarettes, old coffee, and something metallic, a faint, unsettling tang that reminded him of cold steel and colder intentions. Frank was already there, hunched over a crackling walkie-talkie, his fingers fiddling with the dial, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. No one spoke. The silence in the van felt heavier than the approaching dawn, punctuated only by the low rumble of the engine and the occasional burst of static from the radio. They drove in silence for what felt like an eternity, the van's old engine groaning in protest as it ate up the miles. The city lights eventually thinned, giving way to the sprawling, anonymous edges of industry. The target emerged from the darkness, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts, a concrete block surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with glinting barbed wire. Under a single, high-mounted floodlight, a massive semi-transport truck sat gleaming, an imposing, silent beast waiting to be awakened. Ray pointed, a quick, almost dismissive gesture. "That's it. You know what to do." Leo slipped out of the van, the cold air immediately biting at his exposed skin. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of adrenaline and fear. He moved like a shadow, his years of working in tight, forgotten spaces making him nimble, silent. He reached the truck, his hands already assessing the locks, the visible wiring snaking along the undercarriage. He knew the alarm system would be custom, a bespoke web of sensors and circuits designed to foil casual thieves, but he also knew every system, no matter how complex, had a weakness, a fail-safe, a backdoor. A human had built it, and a human could unbuild it, or, better yet, repurpose it. He worked quickly, his fingers dancing over the wires, making connections, disconnecting others, a silent symphony of precise movements. He didn't just want to disable it, he wanted to alter it, to twist its purpose. He wanted to buy time, not just for himself to get away, but for the authorities he hoped would eventually follow, a faint, desperate hope that flickered in the back of his mind. He bypassed the main alarm with a series of deft clicks and snips, then hotwired the ignition. The massive diesel engine rumbled to life beneath him, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the ground, shaking the very bones in his feet. He glanced back at the van. Ray and Frank were watching, their faces illuminated by the dashboard lights, twin silhouettes against the faint glow. He was in, but instead of simply driving off as instructed, a cold calculation hardening his resolve, he made a series of quick, deliberate modifications to the truck's internal wiring. He subtly rerouted certain systems, creating a delayed, almost imperceptible malfunction that would kick in miles down the road, a ghost in the machine. He also left a small, almost invisible trace of specific type of residue from a rare lubricant he used, a signature that only another mechanic, or a truly diligent investigator, might recognize. It was a dangerous game he was playing, trying to leave a breadcrumb trail without being caught in the act, a silent rebellion against the path he was forced to walk. He put the truck in gear, the heavy vehicle lurching forward with a groan of hydraulics. Frank scrambled to open the chain-link gate, its rusty hinges protesting loudly in the quiet night. As Leo passed the van, his eyes met Ray's. Ray gave him a thumbs up, a triumphant grin spreading across his face, a silent congratulation for a job well done. Leo offered a tight, forced smile in return, the muscles in his jaw aching, his stomach churning with a potent mix of fear and self-loathing. He was doing it, yes, but not for them, not for Ray's approval. He was doing it for Sarah and Lily, for the flickering hope of a future where he could look them in the eye without seeing a stranger staring back. He drove for what felt like hours, the massive truck rumbling down the highway, its cargo heavy and silent behind him, a dark secret in the belly of the beast. He followed Ray's pre-planned route, a winding path through deserted industrial roads and back alleys, each turn feeling like a step further into an unfamiliar world. He could feel the tension in his shoulders, a knot of fear and adrenaline that refused to loosen. He kept checking his rearview mirror, expecting flashing lights at any moment, the delayed malfunction he'd rigged a silent clock ticking down in the back of his mind. It wouldn't last forever. Finally, he reached the drop-off point, another desolate warehouse, its windows dark, its purpose ambiguous. Ray and Frank were already there, along with two other men Leo didn't recognize, their faces indistinct in the lingering shadows. The exchange was swift and tense, a silent ballet of illicit commerce. The cargo was moved, boxes and crates disappearing into the cavernous building. Leo was handed a thick envelope, heavy with cash, the crisp bills a tangible, unsettling weight in his palm. "Good work, Leo," Ray said, a genuine warmth in his voice this time, a chilling approval that sent a shiver down Leo's spine. "You're a natural." Leo just nodded, his gaze fixed on the money, not on Ray's unsettling smile. It was enough. Enough to keep the bank at bay, enough to buy them time, to keep Sarah and Lily safe for now. But the cost, the true, immeasurable cost, felt like a heavy stone in his heart. He drove the empty truck to a designated spot a few miles away, left it as instructed, its engine still warm, and then he walked. He walked until his legs ached, until the first hint of dawn painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and pale, hopeful gray. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying the scent of dew and distant factories. He found a gas station with a payphone, a lonely sentinel under a flickering fluorescent light. His hands trembled slightly as he fumbled for a quarter, the metal cold against his skin, then dialed his home number, the familiar digits a lifeline. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep and worry, a fragile thread of sound across the miles. "Leo? Where are you? Are you all right?" The raw anxiety in her voice twisted something inside him. "I'm fine, honey," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, a gravelly sound he barely recognized as his own. He didn't tell her about the truck, about Ray, about the cold dread that had clung to him all night. "The job's done. I'm coming home." He could hear the profound relief in her sigh, a soft exhalation that seemed to carry all the worry of the night. "Lily misses you," she whispered, her voice still laced with a lingering tenderness. "I miss you." A wave of emotion washed over him then, potent and overwhelming, a profound mix of relief that it was over, and an exhaustion that seeped into his very bones. He had made his choice. He had stepped into the darkness, but he had, somehow, found a way to carry a flicker of light with him. A faint ember of hope for a different future. He had the money, a temporary reprieve, but he also had the burden of what he'd done, a weight that would never truly leave him. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he could never truly go back to being the man he was before that dusty motel room off Highway 2, before this night. The sun was rising now, a thin, pale disk on the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the empty road stretching out before him. He knew he had a long drive ahead, the miles ticking by, and an even longer, more arduous road to walk with his conscience, a silent, unforgiving companion. He dropped the receiver back into its cradle with a soft click, the sound echoing in the stillness, and stood there for a moment, just breathing, the world slowly coming to life around him. He pictured Sarah's face, etched with worry but softening with relief, and Lily's bright eyes, and a quiet, aching promise settled in his heart. He would find his way back to them, even if it meant carrying the darkness with him. He just had to keep walking. How was the story today? I want to show you a memorable scene. If there's a moment that overlaps with my memory, the story of that time, the scenery in my memory that I used to go to often, I feel for someone I can't meet anymore, the small things that come to mind right now, please leave it as a detail. If you're curious about a story that's released at the same time every day, subscriptions and notification settings are very helpful in creating videos.